Episode 4, The First Werewolf. This episode is where everything changes. Not through war, not through power, but through a single decision made by a man who refused to accept that protection must fail. To understand the first werewolf, you have to understand the families who serve the Vampire Order. These are not servants in the way that people think. They are not expendable, and they are not forgotten. These families exist across generations, grandfathers, sons, daughters, grandchildren, entire bloodlines dedicated to something greater than themselves. And the reason they serve is not just duty, it's proximity to eternity. The Vampire Order does not randomly create vampires. They select. They observe families over decades, sometimes centuries. They study intelligence, discipline, emotional control, adaptability, loyalty. They watch how bloodlines evolve. And when the time is right, they choose. Not the strongest, not the loudest, but the most capable of becoming something more. And so within these families, a truth is understood. Even if you are not chosen, your blood still might be. Your name might continue, not through memory, but through eternity. To the Order, these families are not ordinary humans. They are pre-vampiric. If a human is the beginning, then the vampire is the perfected continuation. Like lava to a dragonfly. Not separate species, but evolution. Among these families, some are held in even higher regard. One of them was the Aguirre lineage. Now, this family was rooted in the Basque regions of Spain and France, a people whose language stood alone, unlike any other on earth, untraceable, unrelated, unbroken. That alone made them valuable. But the Aguirre family had something more: consistency. Loyalty across generations, service without deviation. And because of that, some of their blood had already been chosen before. From this family came a man named Gorka Aguirre, a man who had given his entire life to the Order, not for reward, not for recognition, but because he believed in continuity. He understood something most never do. What cannot continue was never complete. By the time this story begins, Gorka is an old man, past the age of selection. He knows he will never be chosen. But that does not matter to him, because his legacy does not end with him. It continues through his blood. And the Order knew this. They had watched him. They had measured him. They knew his loyalty was absolute. So they did something rare, something significant. They chose not one, but 3. His grandsons, John Aguirre, discipline, structure, control. Michael Aguirre, intelligence, observation, pattern recognition. And then Ander Aguirre, intuitive perception, adaptive mindset, unbreakable trust. 3 different expressions of the same bloodline. All selected, all to be brought into eternity. This was not just an honor, It was a statement. The Aguirre name would not just continue, it would endure. But this moment in history was not stable. Across parts of the world, particularly within growing political centers, something was changing. Humans were not any longer reacting blindly. They were beginning to organize. There were several figures involved in this shift: politicians, thinkers, strategists, men who began to notice patterns. But one name stands out among them: Whitmore Duval, a man of structure, a man of observation, a man who did not believe in chaos, only systems not yet understood. He began to notice something others ignored. Certain political positions seemed to be filled too perfectly. Leaders who lived unusually long lives, maintained influence beyond normal limits, disappeared only to be replaced seamlessly. This was not coincidence, this was placement. The Vampire Order did not rule openly. They operated above systems. They placed individuals where influence mattered most: governors, senators, kings, and even presidents. And when the time came, those individuals would, quote unquote, die, and then continue elsewhere. Whitmore Duval did not know everything, but he knew enough to become dangerous. And so he did something that had not been done effectively before. He organized. Not armies, not governments, but people. Groups began to form, not random mobs, but coordinated movements. They didn't understand vampires fully, but they understood one thing. There were moments when a vampire would be vulnerable, and they found it, which was the first trance the vampire would go through. After the first trance, as the vampire grew in power, wisdom, knowledge, understanding, this wasn't the case. But when a vampire was in the very first trance, they were in such a different state and a new environment that they could be caught off guard and staked in the heart. When a human becomes a vampire, they do not simply awaken into power. The transition is a process, a controlled biological and psychological restructuring that occurs in phases, the most critical of which is the first trance. During this phase, the body enters a suspended regenerative state, the nervous system recalibrates, the mind adjusts to heightened senses and a new state of being. This is not weakness, this is a transformation. But during this period, a newly turned vampire is not yet fully stabilized. Their awareness is reduced. Their ability to respond is limited. And under the right conditions, they can be killed before that transformation is complete. For a long time, this vulnerability remained hidden until humans began to notice patterns. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. And slowly, humans began to act. Not stronger, not faster, but more coordinated. They found the pattern: newly turned vampires, early trance, limited awareness, the perfect moment. And so they began to strike, not randomly, but precisely. Jan and Mikhail Aguirre entered their trance first. They were in the same location at the same villa, but each was within his own state of transformation, unaware, unprotected, and that was enough. The attackers found them, entered without resistance, and killed them before they could even awake. No struggle, no defense, just silence. Two futures ended. Only one remained, and that was Aguirre. But Ander had not yet entered his trance. He had hesitated, not out of fear, but because he wanted to understand what he was about to experience as best as he could. That delay kept him alive. When Gorka Aguirre learned what had happened, he did not react emotionally. He understood immediately. This was not random. This was a system being exposed. He went to the order and he asked for protection. Now, the order did not dismiss the request. They evaluated it. And what they saw was not just a single incident. They saw a pattern forming. Newly turned vampires were being targeted. And if this continued, the risk would grow beyond individual loss. Because the vampire order did not exist in isolation. It operated within human systems. Many vampires held positions of power, political leaders, advisors, decision makers. If human awareness increased, those positions would be questioned. If those positions were questioned, the system would begin to collapse. And once that collapse began, it could not be contained. So the order made a decision. They would not respond directly. They would not send vampires to protect newly turned ones, not because they could not, but because doing so would expose movement, patterns, and possibly identities. The risk was too great, but doing nothing was no longer acceptable either. So they chose a different approach. They would redirect the threat. They would give humans something else to focus on, something visible, something dangerous, something believable, a new predator. And that predator would not lead back to them. The order approved the creation of a new class of protector, werewolves, not as replacements for vampires, but as protection and misdirection in the early trance. If humans began encountering something else in the wild, something violent, unpredictable, and real, they would hesitate, they would question, they would fear the unknown, and that hesitation would slow the pattern that was forming. The process of creating a werewolf is different from creating a vampire. It doesn't happen directly. It happens in stages. First, a vampire bites a wolf, but the wolf does not become a vampire. The vampire condition is designed for a human. So when it enters the wolf, it does not fully take hold. Instead, it builds inside the wolf, and as it builds, it begins to take on traits of the wolf itself. Things like heightened senses, increased strength, stronger instinct. But it never replaces the wolf's nature. It never fully stabilizes. The wolf becomes a carrier of this curse. Then, when that wolf bites a human, the condition passes forward. And now it is different. It is no longer just a vampire condition. It carries the strength and senses developed in the wolf, combined with a human mind that can actually control it. So when the human transforms, they do not become a vampire. they become something else, a werewolf. They retain their identity, they can think, they can make decisions, but when they transform, they gain in strength, senses, and instinct, all becoming extreme, heightened, and powerful. And that combination, a human mind with animal-level physical ability, makes them very dangerous. Unlike vampires, werewolves are not immortal, but they are able to heal like vampires do almost instantly. They age, they live and die, but while they live, they operate far beyond normal human capability. Gorka Aguirre stepped forward, not out of anger, not out of desperation, but because he understood what was required. He would become the first, not to live forever, but to protect something that could not protect itself. And the order allowed it, because it solved two problems at once: protection and concealment. The transformation was violent. His body resisted, and then it adapted. His strength increased, his senses expanded, his instincts sharpened, but his mind held, because his purpose did not change: protect Anda. And for nearly a month, Gorka learned what he had become. He learned how to control the transformation, how to move between forms, how to think, while something else inside of him pushed to act. He didn't master it, but he understood it enough. And when that time came, that was enough. The night that Anda entered his first trance, they came again, expecting the same result. But this time, they found something else. Gorka Aguirre. Not a human, not a vampire, something new. They did not understand what they were seeing. They did not try to fight it. They broke. They scattered into the dark, trying to escape something they could not comprehend. But Gorka understood them, and more importantly, the instinct within him did too. These were not just intruders, they were a threat to his grandson, his only grandson. And in that moment, instinct took over. What followed was not a battle, it was a hunt. Across the hills, through the dark, the night filled with sound, screaming, running, breaking. One by one, they were found, and by morning, there was no one left. In the days that followed, stories began to spread, not of vampires, but of something else. Something in the forests, something in the hills, something that hunted at night. And those stories made an impact, not enough to stop everything, but enough to change the behavior, to introduce fear, to disrupt certainty, and that was enough. And Aguirre survived. The trance was completed, the transformation held, and the system adapted. The order expanded the program. More werewolves were created, not as leaders, not as rulers, but as protectors, and as a shield between the truth and the world. But there was one thing they did not fully account for, something Gorka had already proven. What is created out of necessity does not remain perfectly controlled. And from that point forward, the world did not just contain vampires. It contained something else, something nearly just as powerful and far less predictable. Gorka Aguirre did not change the world through power. He changed it by becoming what the system required when it mattered most.